Games are often lauded for being rife with potential for the exploration of morality as informed by player choice. But this is an approach that often disregards circumstances of player perspective. This isn't the difference of engaging in actions which are angelically good or heinously evil. This is a matter of how players' choices are themselves informed by the player's role in society. And for the purposes of this discussion, how something as simple as player gender should, though very seldom does, affect player experience. The very matter of a female avatar may seem pedestrian, but it wasn't really so long ago that the idea of playing as a woman in itself was unusual and conversational. And while there's not necessarily a shortage of games that include or feature a female lead, it must be noted that there is a big difference in playing as an identifiably female character to actually filling one's shoes and living life the way she does. While finding empowered women in games today is not such a tall order, they tend to shift between two extremes, either tangling up sexuality within that empowerment, or treating gender identity as an incidental trait at best and functioning simply as characters that may just happen to be women. These are both valid approaches to character writing and may operate well within the contexts in which they are presented. However, they limit our perspective of the character and who she is the rest of the time, and may give us something better resembling an entertaining caricature than a well-rounded person. A character whose gender is incidental rather than affecting is still in many ways a positive one, precisely because such an approach avoids reiterating negative stereotypes. Yet, the matter of gender nonetheless can, and in some cases perhaps should, affect the experience, in ways that are unique to each side of the coin. More than a few games have used the gender divide to determine what certain characters can do physically, but the realities of the social differences between the two are hardly touched upon. We'll be weaving a chunk of this discussion around Persona 3 Portable, as well as a bit of Dreamfall, The Longest Journey later on. So, spoilers ahead. Persona 3 Portable lends a unique voice to this discussion, as it's one of the few RPGs that offer a distinct set of scenarios for male and female leads. While the original game was designed with a male scenario specifically, the female scenario is built upon it, mixing an improved design philosophy on the part of the developers with subtle nuances informed by the player's gender. At times, these differences are as minute and inconsequential as flipped gender pronouns.
You're in charge. What? But she's a girl.
Well, she has fought them before.
Seriously?
While at others, who the player is allowed to interact with and bond with is greatly affected by the matter of his or her sex. We still see some shameless gender typecasting at times, such as with the game's color-coded menus, using blue for the male protagonist and pink for the female, of course. But real potential for gender roleplay is also demonstrated, where the player is not only pegged into particular gender expectations, but is allowed to defy them. Yet, the option of defiance itself is not the point, though it is important that it's there. The main purpose, rather, is that the player is placed into a particular spectrum by another, based on her age and gender, and that she is regarded in a certain way for it. The main prize of perspective, here, is to allow the player to experience a social standing that may be contrary to their own. After all, it would be a sad, sad day if the fate of the world came down to the difference between a pair of testes versus a set of ovaries. And not just the stupidly obvious ones. Perspective shifts will often inform us which routes are specifically available to us. However, by conclusion, one must concede that the routes we're denied access to are locked out based on the same conditions. At first glance, it might seem trivial to observe this difference in experience if the end result between both avenues is the same, to the player's benefit. However, much as in life itself, the difference can lie in the experience as much as the outcome, as is the case in Persona 3 Portable, where gender dictates whom the character is allowed to meet, as well as what sports they're allowed to engage in. The impact of perspectives such as gender and sexuality are often going to be relative to the setting in which they're cast, and as a result, not every game is going to represent the subject in the same regard.
I lost a lot of friends that day. I lost my husband. I grieved, said goodbye, made my peace.
Likewise, such treatment may not be deliberately malicious or meant to antagonize the player.
I still think this is a bad idea. I mean, bringing two girls there is like wandering into a lion's den with stakes strapped to my face.
Deep-rooted sexism may result in an otherwise well-meaning character regarding the player's gender as a crutch when faced in a hostile situation. And similarly, someone who may be easygoing and talk straight with a member of the same sex.
I know how tough it is being the new kid, so wanted to say, hey, see what a nice guy I am?
Might in turn treat a member of the opposite sex differently because of how they view them and what they're looking for when they relate to that person.
I know how tough it is being the new kid, so I thought I'd check up on you. Make sure you weren't freaking out on your first day.
At it again, huh? Honestly, is there any girl you wouldn't hit on?
In extreme cases, male protagonists may be portrayed with glorified sexual prowess, whereas the women encountered are objects of conquest. The shortcoming here is not in the scene itself depicted, but in that there is no female analog in another piece of game media. While female virility is often upplayed, there is seldom any follow-through on sensuality, resulting in a character who is at best very flirty. Pointedly, many heroines are kept from being cast in a role where relationships are a factor, and are often placed in parts that are either maternal.
This is yours, little one. You didn't cry while I was gone, did you?
Or sororal, which simultaneously seem intended to fuel a strong, independent woman identity, but also may function to preserve perceived innocence in the player's eyes.
Come with me. I'll take you somewhere safe.
This isn't the time to run. I'm not like you. Running will just make me look guilty.
Dreamfall: The Longest Journey is an uncommon sort of game, one which places the player in the shoes of a female lead whose plot and backstory both allow for facets of intimacy. Zoe Castillo, Dreamfall's protagonist, is exposed to us as not only having had an intimate past, but having had that experience with a longtime friend of hers who is present on the outset of the story. Not only does she enter the plot recently single and thus neither chaste nor virginal, but she is afforded the opportunity later in the plot, in turn, to become intimate with a man whom she meets and spends time with. Zoe, as the main protagonist of Dreamfall, serves in part to connect the player to the world of the game. As such, whatever she experiences, the player is meant to experience vicariously through her.
Glad to help, doll.
Doll?
I mean, independent and self-reliant female person who's not an object to be ogled at or used solely for my own personal amusement and pleasure.
Zoe's conduct, as a result, is one of the rare instances where a female protagonist is granted sexual agency, as dictated expressly by her personality rather than player input.
I've enjoyed staying here, Damien. With you. Getting to know you. You're someone I might want to get to know better.
Really? I feel the same way.
For example, while role-playing the protagonist allows the player to explore alternate perspective, It must also, by design, allow the player the capacity to play it safe and avoid intimate confrontation. Although in these cases, the player should be free to romance whom they wish. For example, if the other partner is interested and willing.
You're all I can think about day and night. Damn it. This isn't how it's supposed to be. You get it, right? Go back to your room. If you don't go now, you're not gonna get another chance. You're a real piece of work, you know that? Gee, I'm gonna make myself clear. I ain't holding back anymore.
This might also result in players who may dip their toes in the proverbial pool, playing as a character of the opposite sex, but avoiding encounters with characters of the player's own gender. If so, then many players are liable to miss out on what the full spectrum of alternate perspective can mean for the experience, and that challenging one's pre-existing ideas of sexuality and gender relationships can ultimately provide an enriching experience rather than a constricting one. Now, conversely, locking a player on a particular path regarding gender or sexuality invariably means denying access to other perspectives.
I have been searching for you. My highest priority is to be with you.
There she is. Wait, what? What's going on here?
I see. So that's her preference. Well, that explains why we got the cold shoulder.
While some titles are willing to poke fun at matters of sexual orientation, and this can at least help lighten the mood regarding such matters, there is still a sharp contrast between this and depicting a character confidently engaging in heteronormative behavior. Just as players either deserve or need better options for both representation and alternate perspective, so too should supporting characters serve to fuel that experience, rather than just reiterating stereotypes and easy solutions. One avenue in which Persona 3 Portable functions specifically because the female scenario was grafted onto the original male version is that pre-existing character arcs deny the female protagonist certain options that would have likely been available to her otherwise. As such, a major facet of perspective must be the limitations we face, even in the realms we would expect to exceed in. Just because a boy and a girl are in the same room together doesn't mean they have to be able to date each other.
Don't get me wrong, I'm really glad to hear you say so, but I'm not sure if I'm ready for something like that yet. I mean, nothing personal. I think you're a great girl and super cute. But, sorry, I can't really think about stuff like that just yet.
In the same vein, a character should be able to act on the behalf of another character, not out of sexual self-interest, but simply out of platonic concern for another person's well-being. This doesn't have to preclude the character from having a sensual side altogether, but well-balanced perspective may necessitate the player be shown that altruism does not involve tangling up biological urges. When player choice is given and perspective is consciously employed, the player needs to be allowed opportunities that are unique to each side. Allowing the player to better understand a character due to how they may relate to them because of their gender is a strong example of this, as it's a form of sexism which may be subconscious but not necessarily malicious or harmful.
I thought it'd look good on you. Because it keeps track of time. This is all I could think of.
Third-person narratives allow the player the chance to walk deliberately in the shoes of another, but this approach can only function if the character one is placed in stands as a fair representation of a real person, and not one that oozes fetishism yet avoids having any actual sex, since that would only levy accusations of exploitation. There may be a gradient needed in order to ease someone into a comfort zone of engaging in other play perspectives. But the end result may ultimately turn out to be enriching for the gamer, as well as the game.